Hi Dragonflies, welcome back to Dragonfly Spirit Studio. In this video I'm going to be talking to you about stretching paper. Now I do have an older video out there about stretching paper, and if you've already watched that, this one doesn't really contain a whole lot of new information, but a little bit, and the video quality I think is a little better. So I wanted to put this back out because I'm getting ready to release a workshop on watercolor skies and clouds. And in that workshop, we're going to be working very wet, wetting the paper repeatedly. And if you don't stretch your paper, you're really just not going to have much luck with the techniques in that workshop. So if you've held off doing it up until now, but you're wanting to do the Watercolor Skies and Clouds workshop, now's the time to maybe gather your materials and start learning how to do this. I'm going to talk about two methods in this video. The method that I like best, which is using stretcher bars, which I like because we can dry the paper from the back. And also, I know that some of you have difficulty if you have arthritis in your hands. That method can be a little tough. So I'm also going to talk about how to stretch your paper on gatorboard. My preferred method for stretching watercolor paper is to use the stretchers that are normally used for canvas. Using canvas stretchers will give us access to the back side of the paper, which will allow us to accelerate or slow the drying time of washes, which can be very helpful in wet and wet techniques. These stretchers are very heavy duty, with an adjustment in the corner to add tension after the paper dries. This isn't necessary for this course, but I suggest you buy medium duty stretchers because light duty stretchers can warp as the paper dries. To mount your paper on stretcher bars, you need a 1/2 inch overlap all the way around. This means you need to subtract 1 inch from each dimension of your paper to get the dimensions of your stretcher bars. My paper is 18 by 22 inches, so my stretcher bars are 17 by 21 inches. A quarter sheet of watercolor paper is 11 by 15 inches, so you would need stretchers 10 by 14 inches. A 1/2 sheet of watercolor paper is 15 by 22 inches, so you'd need stretchers 14 by 21 inches. It can be difficult to find stretchers in the odd-numbered sizes above 20 inches. You may have to order them online or ask your art supply to order them in for you. But you'll use them over and over again, so you'll only have to do that at the beginning. First, we need to fully saturate the paper, but I don't recommend soaking it. Instead, we'll be working on any surface that's impervious to water. Possibly your tabletop is like mine, melamine or formica, and you can work directly on the tabletop. Or you might work on some other board that's got a waterproof coating on it, or a piece of glass or piece of plexiglass. I prefer not to soak my paper because it can be difficult to find a tub large enough to soak a full sheet. If you use your bathtub, you may transfer oils from skincare products onto your paper and cause it to resist the watercolor. And the most important reason is watercolor paper includes on the surface something called sizing. Sizing reduces the absorbency of the paper somewhat so that the color can sit on top and be more vibrant. So I don't want to lose the sizing. So I'm going to add just enough water to my paper to saturate it, but then I'm not going to rinse away the sizing or any more of it than I can help. Use a clean, soft brush, such as a hake or wash brush, to wet your paper. Use plenty of water and a light touch so that you saturate the paper while disturbing the sizing as little as possible. Once the front side of the paper is completely coated with water, flip it over and do the same thing to the back. Now flip the paper back once more to the front side and add a bit more water. Your goal is to get the paper to absorb as much water as possible without adding excess water to rinse off the sizing. Since we're not rinsing the water away, sizing that may have been disturbed will settle back down on the paper surface as the water evaporates. It usually takes about 5 to 15 minutes for the paper to absorb as much water as it will absorb. You want the paper to be floppy like this, almost like cloth. To attach the paper to the stretchers, I like to use a very light-duty, inexpensive staple gun. I don't want to drive the staples in too securely because I'm going to remove them later. I also use short staples, these are 1/4 inch, which are easier to remove. I know there are some of you out there who have difficulty using a staple gun, maybe have arthritis in your hands. If that's you, you may prefer to staple your paper to gatorboard, which I'll demonstrate after I show how to staple it onto stretchers, because then you'll be able to use your body weight to operate the staple gun. To attach your paper to the stretchers, slide the stretcher bars underneath and use your hands to check by feel to make sure that the paper is centered and you have about a 1/2 inch overlap all the way around. If you do have a bit of trouble with a staple gun, one thing that might help is to reverse your grip from the usual grip to hold the staple gun like this, because now you can use the strength of your thumb to depress the lever. Fold the paper over in the center of one side and attach it with a staple. Rotate everything around to the opposite side and pull just enough to take the slack out. Don't pull too hard or you'll tear the paper, just enough to remove the slack. Fold the paper over and attach it with another staple. Now do the same for the centers of the other 2 sides until you have all 4 sides stapled in the center. Next, work your way out from the center towards each corner, placing your staples about 1.5 inches to 2 inches apart. In the corners, fold one side down and fold the other side over in a little triangle and staple both sides in place. If we're going to work wet and wet with our first wash, we can go ahead and begin right now on the wet paper, or we can set it aside and let it dry. If you're going to staple your paper to gatorboard instead, you can saturate the paper right on the gatorboard. Since you don't need to lift the gatorboard off the surface to apply the staples, you can use 2 hands to press with the staple gun. This still leaves the back portion of the staple gun elevated, so for some people this may still be difficult. If you place something next to your gatorboard of a similar thickness to support the staple gun, then you can use your entire body weight to depress the lever. Or for some people, simply having that support under the back end is sufficient. Place staples about 1.5 inches or 2 inches apart all the way around. You don't need to start in the center. You can just work from one corner all the way around the entire board. And as with the stretcher bars, we can go ahead and begin a wet and wet wash right now, or we can set this aside to dry. Yeah, I know, nobody wants to do this. And kudos to you if you're still even watching at this point. I know it seems like this huge hassle and you just want to get started painting and you don't want to mess around with this. But for especially the Watercolor Skies and Clouds workshop or anything else where you're getting the paper really wet or wetting it repeatedly, it's really going to be a huge advantage. It's going to save you time in the long run because you won't be wrecking things and having to start over. You won't be so frustrated. And I really think that investing some time in learning how to do it and getting comfortable with it now will pay off in the long run. Do I always stretch my paper? No. If I'm working really small, I just tape it down with masking tape like everybody else. But I mean like 5x7 or 8x10, nothing bigger than that. Even quarter sheet is too big for just taping it down with masking tape and doing the kind of really wet and wet stuff we're going to be doing in the Watercolor Skies and Clouds workshop. So get your stretchers, get your gatorboard, get comfortable with it. And I hope to see you in Watercolor Skies and Clouds.